Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. We're going to talk about Seth Skorkowsky being very, very wrong, and we're going to talk about miniatures. All right, so Seth Skorkowsky, let's talk about him real quick. He is a brilliant Dungeons & Dragons commentator. Smarter guy than me with a better channel than me, okay? And I don't talk about most of his videos because he's usually not wrong. But in this video, he was shockingly wrong, and we're going to talk about it, right? So you can see his video below, and in that video, and you can watch. I suggest you watch it, but you don't need to watch it to get the context here. So what does he say? He says the whole video is about miniatures and how we use miniatures, right? And for Dungeons and Dragons, what he said is shockingly wrong. And here's the thing: he's talking about Dungeons and Dragons. Ain't nobody care about it. When you're talking about tabletop role-playing games now, you're really talking about Dungeons & Dragons. This happens constantly on Twitter. Is somebody will bring up a subject and they'll say, and XYZ TPRPG, so-and-so, blah, 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 right? And then people will just come into the comments and they'll be like, no, the D&D does that wrong. That's wrong for D&D. And they're like, well, I wasn't talking about D&D. And they're like, well, what are you squawking about? Like, nobody cares about any tabletop role-playing games other than D&D now, right? Were you wasting my time with something nobody's playing? And that's the thing now, right? Like, if you're talking about tabletop role-playing games, half the people are going to assume you're talking about D&D anyway, because nothing else really, because Dungeons & Dragons is outselling literally the entire industry by far, right? Like, so D&D is the only tabletop role-playing game that matters, and that's why people often assume when you say TTRPGs that you're talking about D&D, because it's the only one that matters now. All right, let's get there. Thanks for yes. All right, hold on. Yeah. So. All right. Okay. All right. Here we go. So, basically, he said miniatures are simply tools. Wrong. Okay, for the miniatures that matter. Now, that is shockingly wrong. And I will go even farther, and I'll just say this now, and you'll understand why I said it at the end of the video. If you're using a miniature as simply a tool, stop using it. There's better, right? So a whole bunch, like, okay, I'll just say it. Reaper Bones, you can throw them in a lake. Who cares? Don't ever use junk miniatures again. There's just better options now for Dungeons & Dragons. If you want something to use as simply a tool, you're not paying attention and you're not playing Dungeons & Dragons right. I'll say that flat out right now. Okay, there's so much better now, right? So first of all, you can go to your FLGS, right? Or you can go on Amazon and you can buy a Reaper Bones skeleton, right? Or you could buy a Reaper Bones wizard, okay? And it's gonna be crafted well. It's gonna be holding an orb. It's gonna have flowy robes. It's gonna look great, right? Stupid, useless, and should not be used. Okay. Only the worst dungeon masters would ever buy a Reaper's Bones miniature today in 2022 because there are so many better options. Okay. So first of all, you can completely reject everything that Seth Skorkowsky said in that sentence, right? Because you don't have to be there anymore. You don't have to be using miniatures that are simply tools. And the reason why is, so you can go right over, right, you can go to WizKids and you can buy the official Dungeons & Dragons miniatures from Dragons of Stormwreck Isle. And they will say, hey, look carefully, right? This is a young man in a green robe with a pointy hat, and he's holding a spell book. That is a wizard. That is a Dungeons & Dragons wizard, right? And it's not just a tool, right? It is a statement. It is saying, this is a Dungeons & Dragons wizard. And when you look at it, right, you see a wizard that you can put on the table, but it echoes back to Gary Gygax, and it captures what he accomplished in 1983 to 1986, and there is legacy, and there is heritage, and there is tradition, and there is America, and there is Saturday morning cartoons, and there is the Forgotten Realms. That is power in plastic. And you would be a fool, right, to go and buy a miniature. It's simply a tool. It is a ridiculous statement. Seth Skorkowsky has never been more wrong about anything he's ever said, right? You can go, Dungeons & Dragons just said, hey, D&D click, Lego click, official product on its way. Tristo Origin is going to be in your hands soon. Or, it might be Elminster, we don't know yet, right? But Lego is going to drop an official D&D Lego miniature, right? You know what that means? Your miniature is an invitation, right? A miniature is not a tool, it is an invitation. It is Lego saying, every time you think about any Lego world, whether that Lego world is Scooby-Doo or Friends, or that Lego world is Monster Hunters, or that Lego world is literally the IRL and here's a Ferrari, you think about Dungeons & Dragons. And Dungeons & Dragons is saying, every time you think about Elminster, every time you think about a Ranger, every time you think about a Barbarian, we want you to think about Lego's Ninjago, and we want you to think about Lego's Harry Potter, and we want you to think about them, and we want you to know that's the new miniature, right? And that miniature is not simply a tool. It is a narrative bridge that spans 1,000 worlds. Lego miniatures are not tools anymore. When you do miniatures right, they are lore. They are bridges. They are narrative. They are a promise. They are a hope. They are talismans of the future of human narrative. The statement, miniatures are simply tools, is a ridiculous shout of foolishness. Seth Skorkowsky is not a fool. He's just behind. And 5 years from now, I think he will understand everything I'm talking about with the rest of the tabletop role-playing and the rest of the Dungeons & Dragons community. We're getting there. All that is my very humble opinion. I'm eager to hear your humble opinion. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.